June would start a new life, just you and me, he promised. Dylan's voice was so persuasive that I couldn't help but smile. His words, echoing those of my late stepfather, wrapped around me like a warm embrace, something I'd rarely experienced. No man had ever truly seen me, but Dylan did. He saw every hidden corner of my soul. I still remembered the day Virginia announced their marriage. For her, it was yet another trophy to parade within her elite social circle. But to me, Dylan was the only person who ever cared. He had listened when everyone else had turned away, and when he whispered that we were leaving behind the life I'd always known, I didn't hesitate. "June, you deserve more," he had said with a sincerity that made my chest ache. I believed him, and soon everything was packed, the air alive with the promise of liberation. Yet on moving day, Virginia joined us in the car. Her smile was tight and calculated, as if she'd orchestrated every detail. Dylan's face remained calm, though I caught a fleeting tension in his jaw. Something was amiss. The drive was stifling. Virginia filled the silence with endless chatter about plans she had never bothered to discuss with us. Dylan's grip on the wheel tightened with every biting remark, yet he said nothing, and neither did I, though my mind raced with questions. Why was she here? This was supposed to be our escape, not hers. When we arrived at our new home, my excitement should have drowned out my unease, but it didn't. The house was breathtaking, modern and spacious with towering windows that spilled an endless light. It was exactly the fresh start Dylan had promised. Yet the undercurrent of tension between him and Virginia clung to the air like a brewing storm. The first few days passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. Dylan busied himself with arranging every detail to perfection. Meanwhile, Virginia was determined to assert her authority, moving furniture and making decisions without asking either of us. I could see frustration simmer in Dylan's eyes, but he remained silent. One evening, while I was unpacking in my room, raised voices erupted downstairs. Virginia's sharp tone sliced through the walls. "This isn't solely your decision, Dylan. Don't forget who's funding all this." His reply was quieter, measured, and I couldn't catch all the words. My heart pounded. What were they arguing about? I pressed my ear against the door, but the voices soon faded, leaving me with more questions than answers. The next morning, Dylan knocked on my door. "Hey, June," he said, his smile softer than usual. "Do you want to go out today?" "Just us." Eager for a reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere at home, I nodded. As we drove into town, Dylan's trademark calm returned. He pointed out familiar landmarks, recounted old stories, and for a moment everything felt normal again. At a cozy cafe, however, he leaned in closer. "June, you know you can trust me, right?" I frowned, taken aback. "Of course," I replied. He hesitated, his fingers drumming on the table. "Sometimes adults make decisions that are hard to explain, but every choice I make is for you," he murmured. His words echoed long after we returned home that night. Later, I overheard him on a hushed phone call. His tone was low and urgent, though I couldn't catch every word. One name, Nicole, pierced through the static. My heart clenched. Who was Nicole? Over the next few days, I started noticing subtle oddities. Dylan's phone buzzed incessantly, and he would slip out for mysterious calls. One afternoon, while searching for a tape to seal a box in his office, I stumbled upon a document addressed to Nicole. My heart pounded as I stared at the name. That evening at dinner, I tried to sound casual. "Dylan, do we have any other friends or family around here?" I ventured. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "No," he finally said, his voice even. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged, pretending it was nothing, but his answer felt like a lie. Deep down, I was sure something wasn't right. The following nights were restless, my mind swirling with darker possibilities. Who was Nicole? What secrets was Dylan hiding? Everything I believed about him was starting to unravel. Unable to contain my anxiety any longer one night, I crept down to his study. My heart hammered as I pushed open the slightly ajar door, light spilling into the hallway. There he sat at his desk, head buried in his hands, looking utterly defeated. Before I could decide whether to confront him, he spoke in a low, anguished tone. "I'm trying to fix this, Nicole. It's not easy." My breath caught. He was speaking to her, the woman whose name haunted me. My mind reeled. What was he trying to fix, and why was I the one he feared might find out? The scraping of his chair against the floor jolted me back. I hurried upstairs, heart racing, determined not to confront him just yet. I needed to know more. One truth was clear. This new life wasn't the escape I'd dreamed of. It was a tangled web of secrets, and I was caught in the middle. The new house was enormous, bathed in light from floor-to-ceiling windows. But beneath its modern sheen lurked something off, an unseen shadow in every corner. Dylan seemed distracted, his usual warmth muted by a weight he wouldn't share. Often, he left me alone at home with vague explanations of work matters. And then there was Virginia, roaming the halls like she owned the place, rearranging furniture and criticizing Dylan's every decision. Left alone, my curiosity festered. I began to track Dylan's increasingly erratic behavior, the late-night phone calls, his furtive glances when he thought I wasn't looking. One day, while he was out, I wandered into his study. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a chaotic blend of files, books, and folders. I told myself I was just curious. There was no harm in looking. Yet deep down, I knew I was searching for something, even if I wasn't sure what. Half hidden under a pile of documents lay an envelope addressed to Riley. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside were letters and photographs, images of a striking woman with a radiant smile and eyes that seemed to hide countless secrets. "Who is she?" I whispered, my hands trembling as I flicked through the contents. Each photo, each word felt like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. When Dylan returned that evening, his calm facade made my stomach churn. Sitting across from him at dinner, I couldn't help but study his face. Was he lying? Was the man I trusted concealing hidden truths? "You seem quiet tonight," he remarked casually, though his eyes were sharp. I hesitated, unsure if I should press him. I began, trying to sound nonchalant. He leaned forward. "June, you already suspect something, don't you?" His words froze me. My breath hitched, and for a long moment, I couldn't speak. How much did he know? How much could he see? I dropped my gaze to the table. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice reassuring, but behind his eyes was a storm of emotion that contradicted his calm tone. "You can always talk to me." The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I avoided his gaze, retreating to my room as soon as dinner ended. My mind raced. Was he manipulating me, or was I just imagining things? That night, every sound in the house amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the distant murmur of Dylan's voice on the phone. I pressed my ear to his closed study door, straining to catch fragments of his conversation. "She's suspicious," he said in a hushed, firm tone. "No, I haven't told her. She's too smart to ignore this forever." I recoiled, my heart pounding. He was discussing me, but who was he really talking to? The name Riley echoed in my mind, intertwining with every doubt I had tried to suppress. The next day, I resolved to uncover the truth. While Dylan and Virginia were out, I returned to his study, this time driven by determination rather than mere curiosity. I rifled through drawers, scanned his computer, and combed through every folder I could find. Then I discovered it, a file labeled Riley_personal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside lay documents detailing financial transactions, exchanged messages, and itineraries for trips Dylan had taken. It was all connected to her. My stomach churned as I pieced everything together. This wasn't a mere acquaintance. Riley was someone crucial to him, someone he'd been hiding from both Virginia and me. That evening, I couldn't face Dylan. I hid in my room, pretending to read, while my thoughts spiraled. The trust I'd placed in him now felt like a fraying thread. Yet Dylan wasn't oblivious. Later that night, he knocked on my door. "June, can we talk?" I hesitated, then opened the door, heart pounding. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stepped inside and closed the door gently behind him. "I feel like something's weighing on you," he said, his eyes searching mine. "If there's anything you need to say, now's the time." The weight of the file pressed on me, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him, not yet. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Okay. Just remember, you can always trust me." As he left, I exhaled shakily. Trust him? How could I, when every instinct screamed that he was hiding something? In the days that followed, tension and suspicion clouded every moment. I watched Dylan carefully, noting every subtle evasion, every time he slipped away to take a call. And Virginia remained oblivious, too wrapped up in her own world to notice the fractures forming around her. One evening, I caught Dylan staring at me from across the room. His gaze was intense, laden with emotions I couldn't decipher, guilt, worry, or something darker. I wasn't sure which frightened me more, the secrets he kept or the thought that I was becoming entangled in them. One thing was certain, whatever was happening, it was far from over. I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Virginia grew colder and more distant by the day. Her clipped, impersonal words made me feel like an inconvenience. It wasn't surprising, she'd always been that way. But now, in this vast new house, her detachment was almost suffocating. Meanwhile, Dylan was different. When he wasn't running errands or disappearing into urgent phone calls, he would invite me into his study. At first, I hesitated. His study felt like forbidden territory, but he insisted. "Come in, June," he'd say softly. "There's nothing here you can't see." He showed me documents, contracts, plans, and emails. Most of it was beyond my understanding, filled with technical jargon, but as he explained each item in his steady, patient voice, I realized this wasn't about business. It was about trust. He wanted me to know I was valued. "You're special, June," he said one evening, his voice quieter as he reached out, lightly brushing my hand. The touch sent a ripple of tension through me that lingered long after I left his study. That night, lying in bed, his words and his touch replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. There was no guilt, no regret, only the undeniable feeling of finally being seen. And yet, the question still loomed. What was Dylan's true endgame? Why was he so invested in me? With every passing day, the ground beneath me shifted, and I feared that soon everything would come crashing down. It all came to a head one night in Dylan's study. The air was thick with unspoken intensity. I sat beside him, the warmth of his hand resting on my knee anchoring me in a moment that felt both intimate and dangerous. We pretended to review papers, though every subtle movement, every pause, was loaded with meaning. Then suddenly, the door burst open. "June." "Dylan." Virginia's voice sliced through the charged atmosphere. My heart leaped into my throat as I turned toward her. Standing frozen in the doorway, her eyes darted between us, narrowing when they landed on his hand. "What are you doing?" she hissed, storming toward us. Dylan didn't flinch. He withdrew his hand from my knee, but instead took mine in his. The gesture was deliberate, a silent declaration. "What am I doing?" he repeated steadily. "I'm choosing someone who truly understands me." Virginia's face contorted in disbelief, a mixture of anger and shock. "You're out of your mind," she spat, voice trembling. "This is ridiculous." Dylan's grip on my hand tightened reassuringly. "What's truly ridiculous is pretending we've ever been nothing more than strangers. This marriage has been a farce from the start." Her composure shattered. I'd never seen Virginia so visibly shaken. Her usual control crumbled as she pointed an accusing finger at me, venom dripping from every word. "You've lost your mind, June. You think this is love? He's using you, just like he's used everyone else." "Enough," Dylan interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "Don't twist this into something it's not. You've ignored her for years, treated her as if she didn't exist. Don't act like you care now." For a moment, Virginia looked as though she might cry, then her face hardened once more. "Pack your things," she said, her voice icy. "It's time for you to leave." A heavy silence followed as Virginia stood, staring at him as if deciding whether to fight back. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out. The echo of her heels fading down the hall sent a shiver through me as I sat there, frozen. Dylan turned to me, his hand finding mine again. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, though inside I was a jumble of shock and defiance. "What happens now?" I whispered. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "We move forward," he said simply. In the hours that followed, everything became a blur. Virginia locked herself in her room, the sound of drawers opening and closing as she packed her things. Dylan stayed close, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. When Virginia finally emerged, her face was a mask of anger and defeat. She didn't say goodbye, she didn't even look at me as she left, suitcase in hand. I felt a strange mix of relief, sorrow, and something darker, a quiet vindication, perhaps. For years, I'd watched her take everything for granted. Now, for the first time, she was the one losing. After the door closed, Dylan's gaze softened as he squeezed my hand. "It's just us now," he murmured. "Are you ready?" I wasn't sure if I was ready, but as his hand entwined with mine, a flicker of certainty broke through the turmoil. That night, the house felt eerily quiet. Dylan and I sat together in the living room, the silence between us both comfortable and charged. I couldn't shake the image of Virginia's defeated face. It should have made me feel guilty, but instead, I felt free. Yet, freedom carried its own burdens. Dylan's comforting presence was a reminder of choices that could never be undone. The next day, Virginia left without a word. I expected relief, but an unexpected emptiness settled in her absence. The once familiar house now felt alien. That evening, Dylan prepared dinner for just the two of us. The table, once filled with tense silences and biting remarks from Virginia, now exuded a heavy, unspoken sorrow. I could feel his eyes on me as we ate, though I dared not meet his gaze. After dinner, we returned to the living room. Dylan sat beside me on the couch, closer than usual. The warmth of his presence made the silence almost unbearable. Finally, his voice broke through, soft and hesitant. "June, there's something I need to tell you." I turned, heart pounding, as his hand lightly touched my shoulder. Before I could brace myself for more, I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't planned, it happened as naturally as breathing. Dylan didn't pull away. Instead, his hand slid around my waist, and suddenly everything felt inevitable. That night, we crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. It wasn't merely physical, it was the culmination of months of unspoken words, lingering glances, and a bond that defied every rule. In the quiet aftermath, I lay in his arms, feeling neither guilt nor regret, only the profound sensation of being seen. But the next morning, reality crashed in like a cold wave. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, Dylan's arms still draped over me, and the memories of the night before swirling in my mind. A pit formed in my stomach. Was this really what I wanted, or had my anger toward Virginia driven me to something irreversible? I slipped out of bed, wrapping myself in a blanket as I stared out the window, the weight of my decision settling heavily upon me. When Dylan awoke, he found me in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. Approaching from behind, he wrapped his arms around my waist. "Good morning," he murmured softly. For a fleeting moment, I leaned into him, daring to believe this could be the beginning of something new, a genuinely good beginning. Yet, deep down, a shadow of doubt lingered. The day passed in a strange haze. Dylan carried on with his usual calm demeanor, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something dangerous. That evening, as we sat together in the living room, his eyes darkened with a seriousness that sent a shiver down my spine. "June, I need you to know something," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I braced myself. "What is it?" He hesitated, conflict written all over his face. "What happened between us, it wasn't a mistake. I don't regret it, but I need to be sure you're truly okay with this." I nodded, though a knot tightened in my stomach. I managed, though uncertainty lingered in my tone. Before we could continue, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway froze us both. I turned to Dylan, confusion and fear mingling in my eyes. "Who could that be?" I whispered. Dylan's expression darkened as he moved toward the window. He pulled back the curtain, and his face turned pale. "It's your mother," he said in a nearly inaudible whisper. My heart sank. She was supposed to be gone. Virginia had left without a word. So why was she back? The doorbell rang, its chime shattering the silence. Dylan's jaw tightened as he said, "Stay here," before moving toward the door. I couldn't just sit still. I followed him, heart racing. When the door opened, there stood Virginia on the porch, her expression as cold and unyielding as ever. "I'm not here to stay," she declared sharply. "I only came to collect what's mine." Her eyes flicked to me, and for the first time, I saw something in them that wasn't mere anger. It was calculated, dangerous. "I know what you've done," she said, her gaze piercing both of us, her voice icy. Dylan didn't reply immediately. Instead, he crossed his arms protectively in front of me. "You've already lost," he said steadily. "So why are you here?" Virginia's laugh was bitter, almost mocking. "You really think this is about you, Dylan?" "It's about her," she said, pointing at me. "You're using her, just like you used me." Her words hit me like a slap, but Dylan remained unmoved. "Leave her out of this," he said firmly. Virginia stepped closer, her tone venomous. "She's nothing more than a pawn to you. Do you really believe you care about her?" Something inside me snapped. "You don't get to lecture me about loyalty," I said, my voice shaking with raw emotion. "You were never there for me, never truly." "Dylan's the only one who's ever cared," I added, my heart pounding. Her face hardened. For a moment, I feared she might strike me, But then she straightened, smoothing her jacket as if reclaiming control. "Fine," she said coolly. "Stay here and ruin your life, but don't come crying when it all falls apart." With that, she turned and strode out the door, the fading sound of her car engine the only proof she'd ever been there. I stood frozen, breath coming in shallow gasps, as Dylan stepped to my side and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he murmured softly. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized the weight of our choices would haunt us in every quiet corner of this house. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt free. In the heavy silence that followed Virginia's departure, the house seemed to exhale a long-held breath. I wandered the quiet halls alone, each step echoing against cold, polished floors as if marking the passage from an old, suffocating life to an uncertain new beginning. The adrenaline from the confrontation still pulsed in my veins, mingling with a bittersweet sense of liberation that I couldn't fully claim as my own. Drawn to the large bay window in the living room, I watched the early morning light spill in like a promise. Staring out at the awakening world, I tried to decipher the conflicted emotions swirling inside me. Was I truly free, or had I merely stepped into a different kind of prison, a labyrinth of tangled secrets and unreliable loyalties? Dylan joined me by the window, his presence as steady as ever despite the storm that had just passed. His eyes, usually so open and honest, now carried shadows of regret and determination. "I know this isn't how you imagined our future," he said quietly, his hand finding mine in a tentative gesture of reassurance. "But I promise you, every choice we make from here on out will be ours. No more secrets, no more lies." His words, gentle yet firm, stirred something deep within me, a fragile hope that maybe, together, we could mend the fractures that had long defined our lives. Over the next few days, as Virginia's absence settled into a lingering ache, Dylan and I began to rebuild the contours of our relationship amid the ruins of our former lives. The house, once a battleground of suppressed resentments and hidden agendas, gradually transformed into a space where whispered confessions and tentative smiles replaced cold silences. We spent long afternoons in the study, poring over documents and plans that once served as barriers between us. Now, they became the scaffolding for a new understanding, a mutual commitment to transparency, even if it meant exposing vulnerabilities we had both long concealed. Yet, even in these moments of intimacy, the past was never far behind. I often replayed that night of confrontation in my mind, the shock in Virginia's eyes, the resolute calm in Dylan's voice as he declared his choice, the painful clarity with which I saw our lives unraveling. Each memory reminded me that freedom, while intoxicating, came at the price of hard truths and difficult decisions. There were days when the weight of these revelations pressed so heavily on my chest that I questioned whether I had the strength to face what lay ahead. One cool evening, as dusk crept through the wide windows and shadows stretched across the floor, Dylan and I sat together on the back porch. The sky was a tapestry of deep blues and soft grays, and the only sound was the whisper of wind through the trees. "I've been thinking," Dylan said slowly, breaking the comfortable silence, "about what it means to choose a new path. Sometimes, I wonder if we're running away from something, or perhaps running towards something we can't quite name." His gaze searched mine, seeking confirmation or perhaps forgiveness for the uncertainties that haunted him. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. "Maybe it's both," I replied, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. "Maybe we're leaving behind a past that was never meant for us, while stepping into a future where we have to rebuild everything from scratch." In that moment, the enormity of our situation settled over us like the night itself, a quiet, relentless force that would demand courage and honesty in equal measure. As the stars began to emerge, scattered like tiny beacons in the vast darkness, I realized that the journey ahead would not be easy. The wounds inflicted by past betrayals and shattered trust would take time to heal, and the scars might never completely fade. Yet, in the fragile warmth of Dylan's hand in mine, I sensed a possibility, a chance to redefine who we were, to write our own story unburdened by the ghosts of old mistakes. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the steady rhythm of Dylan's breathing beside me, I made a silent vow. I would face the uncertainties and the lingering shadows of our past with courage. I would seek the truth, however painful it might be, and embrace the freedom that comes not from running away, but from daring to stand in the light. In the quiet of that dark room, I realized that while our journey was only just beginning, it was ours to shape, together, however imperfectly, towards a future where every secret was laid bare and every heart had the chance to heal.